Hey, welcome into This Life Matters. This is Drew, and this is, of course, my co-host Gigi. And we get together. We like to call this show This Life Matters. How you doing today, Gigi?
Really, really well. Got up really early. Took a granddaughter to school. Went to my office, and so well, the day is moving on.
Yeah, it's got no choice. It's gonna do it anyway, with or without us. So,
Right.
how
Uh,
how's your week been so far?
the week's good. I'm listening to one of my daughters said, "Here, Mom, you need to listen to this audio book." And so I'll give a shout out to Claire for that. And she's listening to it apparently. She has an executive coach, and that's who told her about it. And, it's from the author of Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert. And, the actors that starred in that movie, I'm not fond of. And I think maybe for years I've associated that with the author, separating it. So the name of this audiobook is Big Magic. And it's living your creative life and what that means for every person. And when you have ideas and if you don't act on them, maybe you lose them or somebody else takes them so anyway, that's what I'm listening to. And I think my phone just kind of,
Flipping a little bit, yeah. So that's pretty good. So today on the show, before we get into the show, well, today we're going to be talking about gentrification and some of the different things that happens when a community of people are displaced from a mental health standpoint. And as we see different stages of it happening throughout the U.S., you're gonna figure it out.
I'm going to figure
uh,
it out
so
together.
as we see gentrification happen over different stages in the United States, every community has faced it. We've seen it in Tulsa. I'm living here in Portland, and I see it here, like in a latter stage. I've seen it in Kansas City, so it happens a lot. So we're gonna talk about the mental health side of just losing a community and being displaced in the community. So before we start every show, there's a saying that we like to say from Dr. King. And how does it go?
Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter.
And so this matters to us. This is an issue that matters because we know that there's a conversation that has to be had because and it needs to be had on two different points. There's always the issue of the individuals who lose the community, which is the first and foremost should be the first set of people that we should focus our attention on. But then there's the individuals who just look at gentrification by the definition of the word. Like all they're doing is coming in and taking advantage of an opportunity to seize the quote unquote American dream. I'm gonna buy me a house really cheap. I'm gonna fix it up. I'm gonna live in a community that fits my needs and has all the amenities that I would like. And and why should I feel guilty because I've done that? And so this is one of the main reasons why I felt motivated for us to talk about that issue because I feel like we have to talk about the person, the gentrifier, because in most cases the gentrifier is looked at or demonized as a racist, because a lot of cases that's where that's what ends up happening is they end up taking over a community that was either populated by minorities at some point or it was in some cases it could be a community that was taken over because of just other opportunities. But we'll cover all those different things. You even brought up a very interesting point when it comes to the issue of gentrification and how globally you have these war-torn cities that are looked at and taken over. Even another thought to even add on to that one from an international standpoint is what happens to these cities that are taken over for Olympics and then just completely abandoned. So we've got a full topic today.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think people can relate to, um, if they haven't lived in an area that has been gentrified, Well, why don't you give kind of a definition of what you're talking about with gentrification first?
Well, let me look. I'll look up the actual the actual term.
About gentrification, I think about it in two different ways, but I think what you're talking about is that an area becomes maybe either blighted
Yeah,
down, and another, and generally that's going to be a minority area. It could just be a poor area of a town, and people don't have money to fix it up, keep it up, and all that. Maybe there's businesses that have closed down. Um, and then generally it's going to be Caucasian people, has been typically come in and redo the area. Young urban professionals, I think this started that term with young urban professionals, maybe
yeah.
come redoing housing and moving in,
So
and new businesses starting there.
yeah, and by the definition, and I like to always bring in the actual definition, is it says the process of renovating and improving a house or district so that so it meets the comforts of middle class taste. Now that's one of the definitions you could look up and see for it. I think for me, I'm looking at it as if you were to take anyone and say, okay, we're going to give you the opportunity to leave the setting that you're in and go to a setting that you could create and have all the amenities and comfort that you would want. Most of us would do that. In
Yeah.
fact, most humans would love to gentrify Mars, when we get the chance, and that sounds silly, but we all have if we were presented with the opportunity, we would all like to take advantage of these things. For me, like you had said, the urban blight and all the different things, the unfortunate thing is the capitalist society that we live in allows those systems to kind of be done without justice. I've always said that, the word, by the definition of gentrification, most people want you to bring it on. They want their neighborhood renovated and done, but you need to do it with justice. And when you follow a model that says, well, this is going to bring money, it typically excludes justice. And what I mean by justice is you can't come in and create urban blight by redlining, by saying, we're not going to give anyone home improvement loans in this area. We're not going to do anything to help these businesses revitalize, to be revitalized. We're just going to close everything out, board everything up, and create blight. And that's when I say it's gentrification without justice. That's when it's an unfortunate thing when someone who had a business that could have thrived, when someone had a neighborhood that could have been a welcoming community, when you purposely target it and you bring in, you purposely bring in all the tools needed in order for it to enter into that blight stage so that you can then take it over. That's when I feel like it's not serving people justice, and that's when it begins to take a toll on people from that community because of the way that they lose their community. Once you see a community thriving and going and you love it, and then over the course of time you see it slowly decrease. You see things stop, happening for this beautiful community you grew up in. It begins to change your point of view on life. It begins to change who you are, the character and your makeup. You begin to be more negative and more defensive about different things. And I believe that that's an important factor to bring up, for having an understanding on some of the anger and the pain that a person who's experienced gentrification in their community may have toward the gentrifier.
Mm-hmm. I grew up in a town in Oklahoma, Lawton, Oklahoma, and when I was still I guess I might have been in college or late high school. No, maybe college. Lawton was the first town that actually tore down their downtown. Now, those businesses had to move out or rebuild, but that is another aspect of something that was completely torn down I don't know, they called it urban renewal at
Yeah,
the time.
that's what it's called.
I remember growing up with lots of buildings. The place my father worked, the bank that he was in, that was torn down. They built a new one, but it was the first town where a downtown shopping mall was built instead of the community's downtown. And that was quite a loss. And then the things that they wanted to get rid of just moved out to the suburbs. There were lots of pawn shops and bars and all sorts of things because it's a military town. It just moved out to another part of town. So Tulsa, of course, um, the main um, embarrassment and shame of our town that wasn't ever taught in any books or anything until recently or talked about was the Tulsa race riot and destroyed the whole Greenwood Cultural District, what's now called the Cultural District, but it was the Greenwood District with many, many thriving businesses. And, February is Black History Month, and there's a lot of and productions going on in Tulsa that represent the Black history, and films and documentaries and things. And so that's something that people could familiarize themselves with. And today in the newspaper, it was announced that there's a big multi-use building that's going to be built actually right there. I don't know yet what the businesses are that are going to be in that, but it's different than what was there.
Yeah.
And so there's not as much, there's businesses going in, and that may result in more projects that are refurbishing what's there for people who live there. That's what I'm hoping will happen.
Yeah, and that is the hope. And I think one of the bigger things is when you take an area, and using Greenwood for an example, when I first moved to Tulsa, I remember coming and taking pictures of the little plaques that were on the ground and not understanding and knowing about the 1921 race riots. And I had a gentleman who worked at the Greenwood Chamber of Commerce. He's passed on now, but he came down and he completely educated me on everything about that particular subject matter and told me why. And then as I lived later on, moved down the street, just a block down the street, a few blocks down the street. And as I watched the community kind of gentrify, like evolve over the past few years, there's a part of me that's like, I like that they're putting things there, but I never want the culture stripped. And that's the thing I do appreciate about Tulsa, that there are some people who truly are saying, don't strip the culture away. Don't take down the Black Wall Street signs. Don't take down, the murals. Continue to let it be known what was here and why this is such a historic place. To outside of the riot is a sore spot that doesn't necessarily invoke a lot of pride. However, the factor of what was there before the riot is one of the most beautiful things that should not be erased. And so it's a community that I believe is handling it. It could be handled better, but it's handling it well. In comparison to a community here that I've encountered where there's been a lot of people who were displaced from Northeast Portland who weren't necessarily, given some of the same things that Tulsa was given as a way of saying, hey, we recognize that this community was once thriving and it once belonged to another set of people. I think that's the key factor is that, in our chase for comfort, in our chase for saying, hey, I want this next to me. I want to be able to go to to a Starbucks and I need this and that. Remember that there was a culture there. And the truth of the matter is the people that the culture belonged to still may very well be there. And so when you encounter people in an area, like if you're a gentrifier, if you just moved into this neighborhood, because, for example, the neighborhood I moved out of was starting that process. And even the home I was living in has now been renovated and is a market for more than what I could probably get it for. I couldn't go back home to that home if I wanted to. And if you get into that community and you begin to see the shift and all the different things that are going on, you could go to the Starbucks or the new, store that they may, grocery stores that they may put in place in the future. Understand that the people who are in that community still belong to that community. And I think sometimes people don't understand that. And that's one of the things that I've seen where someone gets offended that, someone says, hey, they may be asked the question like, hey, are you new to the neighborhood? And it's like, well, you may not have noticed me, but I'm not. Just be aware, be socially aware if you are a person who is in a position where you're moving into these, new places downtown and other things. And I say that to say that this may sound backwards when it comes to it, but one of the things that's always brought the topic of gentrification up for me has been how it affected the homeless population. And I've always been an advocate for if you're going to, if you're in a downtown area, and I've always said, no matter how your city's being renewed, be kind, show justice to the homeless population, because it may sound kind of silly, but some of those people in the homeless population is what kept some of those businesses going. It keeps some of those businesses protected to some degree. Some of the people in a community, although they may not seem like they make you comfortable, aren't necessarily blight. They're not. They're humans. They can be loved. They have the right to patron, like to be in your business. I would just say make sure you treat people well. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Oh, and especially, especially your church. Do not segregate the homeless from from everyone else. There does not need to be a separate. And this is just me on my soapbox saying, I just feel like that's a huge part. And I understand that the homeless population can make people there can be, situations where someone's unkept. There could be a situation where I'm not going to lie and pretend like everything's hunky dory, everything's okay. There could be a person who may be intoxicated or a person who's experiencing mental health issues. However, especially when you're congregating under the cloak of religion, we'll just say religion, when I'm not going to point out one particular religion, you should probably show love more than any other time. That's your opportunity to show love. So when I definitely talk about like that, like you have to understand if you're there and yeah, it's convenient for the middle class to get to you. It's convenient because that's the new happening spot. But at the end of the day, some of those homeless people live there. They're there at night. They're there all the time. Find a way to serve them. Find a way to be a part of their life. Because here's the thing. Your business, your church, your house, whatever it is that you have may come and go with the fads. People may abandon that downtown area and do something different. But those homeless people may still be there at the end of the day. And so treat them right and just give them justice. I'm done with that soapbox. I'll let you. Let me add.
Okay. One of the things about the gentrification process, or whether it's gentrification or losing your home or culture, whatever may have happened, is that sense of loss and that grief process that goes on with that. And we lose so much anyway all the time, whether it's people in our lives, we talk about this on This Life Matters a lot, is the losses that happen and how we're going to deal with that. So when a community loses their culture, they don't have that sense of place anymore that is theirs. And it doesn't matter whether it is a community that you're being priced out of. And I mentioned when we were prepping for the show in the Tulsa area, a whole town one time was moved, and now it's covered up by a lake. And that town had been there for a long, long time. were moved, there was a whole new town built for them.
Yeah.
So they their whole town because of that. And then the people around the world that are being the refugees, they have lost their home. Maybe they're creating a culture in their tented cities, but it's not the same. It's never going to be the same.
Yeah.
And they're experiencing this sense of loss, and sometimes about, for instance, the Greenwood community and other communities that have been gentrified and lost, is that sense of what I think is one of the deepest losses that we experience is the idea of what could have been.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important because each culture wants to be involved in the mainstream culture. We don't want to be separated completely and discarded. You know, it's sort of like if you come to my city, I want you to celebrate. I don't want you to just celebrate African American culture. I want you to be able to celebrate your culture, everybody else's culture, and I really do want diversity. And I think when we say it casually, and a lot of times we want diversity as long as it fits our agenda, as long as it it kind of makes us comfortable. But there, with diversity comes the price of understanding you have to keep a person's culture alive at all costs. And so sometimes that means you assure that there are businesses that meet a person's culture. And you know what? It doesn't, that irritates a lot of people. I know a lot of people say, hey, no, if I got the money to start my business here, I should be free to start my business. You shouldn't you shouldn't save one business space for a black business because this was a black neighborhood. I disagree with that. And it's the same thing if it was in reverse. There needs to be something that helps maintain the culture of a community. Keep the community centers open. Keep the street signs that reflect some of the heroes of that past community around, because not only will it help the next generation be more diverse and more loving, because they have a history and a knowledge of what came before them, a full and complete history of knowledge of what came before them. Because when we share cultures, what I see that we do is that we allow our children to find a sense of pride in our country and our nation when our one-sided point of view falls short. Because there are things that I can look at in African American history and say I'm not proud of. Mm-hmm. But if I get a chance to look at something from Asian American culture and identify with that, then that helps motivate and boost my sense of pride for the nation that I belong to. So we can't just isolate down and say I should only look at this one source of pride, this one source of inspiration, when the truth of the matter is, when we come together as a people and as a whole, we are a mighty nation of people that are mixed together, and we deserve the opportunity to love together, to live together, and share each other's culture. We can no longer rob our children and our communities of the opportunity of sharing that love together.
I really like when there's the cultural festivals and things like that if people don't have an opportunity to actually personally know somebody, and sometimes you don't, depending on where you live and for a living, things like that, if you might not connect with people, but at least going to festivals and eating food. Food is such a thing.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Lots of kinds of foods. And that's one way that if you know somebody who has a different culture than yours, that you can actually get together and share that food. And by doing that, you learn about each other. Yeah. We're all the same. If you've listened to this show very long, I have a niece, and she lives in the Middle East, and she's lived there for 5 years. And one of the things that she has said and has believed more than ever is We're all exactly alike. Everybody wants their families to be safe. Everybody wants to practice their own form of religion. Everyone wants to be able to have the kind of food to be able to provide for their families. They love their husbands and wives, their children. They want to educate them. We're all
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the final thing that I'll say before is the series that we've been in this year has been talking about, the moral conflicts of life. And we haven't forgot that about this particular show. This is a moral conflict. This is an everyday moral conflict that we all face. And from my angle, there's two ways that we have to face this. When we face this moral conflict, there's two ways to tackle it. One is to make sure that we're responsible as people who may have had an area that's invaded to still show love to a stranger, regardless if we feel as though they're treating us right or whatever, but to first and foremost take a look at us and let no one displace us from a place of love. And the second thing, as far as a moral conflict is kind of looked at, is if you're a gentrifier, if you're a person that is, don't be consumed by social guilt or white guilt or whatever type of guilt. Do something about it. Get involved with the community, get involved with that other culture, and get a little bit uncomfortable and get to know the people. And that's included with the homeless people who are part of that community. That's including the people who are different ethnic groups, different religious groups. If they were there before, get involved. Don't just say that you support it, with a social media post or a sign in your yard or a shirt. Actually be involved. Patron the businesses that were there before that are trying to thrive and don't want to leave. Get involved in that way.
There's a good example of a way of revitalizing that I saw on, I think it was on 60 Minutes. It was either on 60 Minutes or it was on the Sunday morning show. And it is the owner of the Atlanta Falcons. And he has formed projects that are training the people that live in that area around that stadium. It's not like wiping them out, tearing it down, all of that. It's not that at all. It's training people that live there to be carpenters, to be electricians, to be plumbers, to be contractors, to own businesses, and they're revitalizing that area around that stadium with training and education and children's programs. And so the people are still living there.
Yeah.
It's somebody coming in and taking it over. And that is what I think that would be a great
That is. And I think for me, one of the big things is all of the future, I would say all the entrepreneurs, all the future business owners, hear that message and hear that, take someone from that community and teach them and train them up in a new way of doing business. Get involved in that way too. That's a brilliant, that's one of the best examples. Because if you're going to build a whole stadium in my community, then I want the opportunity to help build it. I want the opportunity to help, for my children to be employed there, potentially to work there. And I'll have a greater sense of pride for what's happened instead of feeling robbed and stripped. And our country has a history of doing this. And I'm not saying that to down, our nation. I love, but I'm saying that we can stop the cycle. We can do things differently. We can educate. We can inform. We can love. We can do all these things in order to create a more cohesive, diverse tomorrow. But it's going to take a little bit of effort. And truthfully, it may actually affect your bottom line in the short term. But overall, I think the community will be a lot more blessed to see like I said, a diverse life.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree totally
All right.
with
Well,
that.
that's today's show. Once again, if you just joined us, make sure you listen back. And this is a show about gentrification. This is one of the daily moral conflict that we face when we live in a community that has been gentrified. There's different stages of it, and we didn't go in depth into that part of it. We more or less talked about just the awareness of it. And this conversation could go several layers deeper. In all truthfulness, about the emotional side of feeling displaced. And so we'll be continuing our conversation in different times about this. So join us next week as we continue our conversation about the moral conflicts of life. And I'm Drew. This is Gigi.
And we'll see you next week.